My family laughed when I walked alone into the wedding, but when a billionaire walked in, the sound of my heels echoed sharply against the marble floor of the Crystal Bay Hotel's grand ballroom. I could feel their eyes on me before I even reached the entrance. My heart thudded. Steady and deliberate, with each step, I told myself I had prepared for this moment. Yet nothing quite prepares you for walking alone into a room full of people who once called you family. Now, watching for any sign of failure. I am Alicia Marie, 30 years old, senior marketing manager at a leading New York branding agency. I live in the city alone. By choice, my life is full. My days are consumed with campaigns, client meetings, and creative brainstorming sessions that leave me buzzing with purpose. But tonight, none of that mattered. Here, in this gilded ballroom in my hometown of Charleston, I was not the accomplished professional I had become. I was just Alicia, the black sheep, the one who had chosen career over marriage, ambition over conformity. The wedding belonged to my cousin Amelia, the youngest daughter of my Aunt Victoria, and the latest to cross the coveted threshold of matrimony. Her fiancé, a bland but well-connected banker, had secured her the status my family revered most. Cassandra, my older sister, queen of this toxic hierarchy, stood near the entrance in a gown that seemed to drip with casual superiority. Her life was the benchmark against which I had always been measured. Married to Jason, an attorney with old money charm, mother to 2 perfectly styled children. Cassandra had mastered the performance my family adored. For years, I had struggled to compete on terms I did not respect. I graduated top of my class at Columbia, carved out a space in a fiercely competitive industry, and built a life that, while solitary, was undeniably mine. Yet none of that seemed to matter when I walked into family gatherings. There, love was conditional, and success measured by wedding bands and family portraits. The invitation to Amelia's wedding had arrived with a subtle sting, plus one optional. I stared at that line for days. The idea of renting an escort crossed my mind more than once. My best friend Olivia suggested it outright. No one would know. Allie, it would just shut them up. But I couldn't do it. Pretending was a language they spoke fluently. I refused to join their chorus. So I walked in alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Whispers bloomed behind manicured hands. Cassandra's smile curled with the satisfaction of prophecy fulfilled. My mother's gaze flicked over me, lingering with the same weary disappointment that had colored our relationship since my early 20s. My father barely looked up from his conversation with Uncle Philip. I made my way to the seating chart, finding my name assigned to the singles table. No surprise there. I forced a smile, collecting a glass of champagne as armor against the onslaught to come. Dinner was a parade of polite jabs disguised as conversation. Aunt Margaret asked when I might finally settle down. Uncle Robert commented on how busy I must be to attend family functions alone. Cassandra, never one to miss an opening, leaned across the table. It's brave of you to come solo. Ali, so many women wouldn't. Her voice was syrupy, each word laced with condescension. I laughed lightly, refusing to bite. It's easy when you know your worth. But the truth was, each comment scraped against old wounds I thought long scarred over. I excused myself after dessert, retreating to the powder room where I stared at my reflection under unforgiving lights. My eyes shimmered with unshed tears, mascara perfectly intact, only because I refused to give them the satisfaction. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and reminded myself of the life I had built, one defined by resilience and authenticity, not their narrow definitions of success. When I returned, the room had grown louder with the blur of wine and celebration. The bouquet toss was announced with a flourish. I avoided it, lingering by the bar where Olivia's words echoed in my mind. You owe them nothing. Ali, remember that. Then the doors swung open. Conversations halted. A ripple moved through the crowd. I turned to see a man entering with the kind of presence that demanded attention. Tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, his every step seemed calculated yet effortless. A murmur ran through the room. Is that Ethan Blackwell? Someone whispered. Ethan Blackwell, the tech billionaire whose innovations had disrupted industries. A man who rarely appeared in public, much less at a small society wedding in Charleston. The collective curiosity was palpable, but it was his gaze that undid me. It swept the room with cool detachment until it found me. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, everything else fell away. There was recognition there, though we had never met. Something unspoken passed between us as he began walking straight toward me. In that suspended second, as the crowd held its collective breath, I knew the night had shifted. Whatever story had been written for me at this wedding, it was about to be rewritten, and none of them, not Cassandra, not my parents, not anyone in this room, would see it coming. The moment Ethan Blackwell's shoes touched the marble near the bar, the air seemed to shift. Conversations slowed. The DJ faltered mid-sentence. All eyes followed him. I stood frozen, glass in hand, heart pounding in my chest, in a room where I had arrived invisible. I was now squarely in the center of its attention, tethered by the gaze of a man no one had expected. He reached me with a measured stride, eyes never wavering. Up close, he was even more striking. Sharp cheekbones, piercing gray eyes, a calm that radiated from him like gravity itself. Without hesitation, he extended his hand, voice deep, deliberate. Sorry I'm late. Love. Traffic was a nightmare. A stunned silence rippled outward. My fingers closed around his instinctively. I should have pulled back, should have demanded answers, but instinct overrode logic. I thought you might not make it, I heard myself reply. Voice steady despite the thunder in my chest. A slow smile touched his lips, the kind that knew exactly what it was doing, and missed this never. In one smooth motion, his arm slipped around my waist, warm and firm, grounding me as if we had danced this lie 1,000 times before. The room seemed to tilt. Cassandra's mouth hung open. My mother blinked rapidly, recalibrating her entire worldview. I could feel the weight of their stares, their disbelief palpable. Play along, Ethan whispered against my ear, voice low and calm. You looked like you needed rescuing. My mind raced. Who was this man? And why was he choosing to do this? Yet something in his tone, unhurried, sure made it feel strangely safe. Perhaps the exhaustion of years spent defending myself to this family dulled my resistance. Perhaps it was the sheer audacity of the moment. Either way, I nodded imperceptibly. Jessica, radiant in her gown, approached hesitantly, curiosity dancing in her eyes. Alicia, you didn't mention bringing someone. Ethan turned smoothly, taking her hand with practiced charm. Ethan Blackwell, congratulations on your beautiful wedding. I'm afraid I disrupted the festivities a bit. Jessica's surprise morphed into gracious delight. Any friend of Alicia's is welcome. In minutes, the impossible happened. The wedding planner was summoned, seating rearranged. My solitary chair at the singles table was abandoned as we were ushered to the VIP section. Ethan's hand remained lightly at my back, an anchor in the surreal tide. As we sat, Cassandra appeared, mask of civility barely concealing her seething curiosity. You didn't mention you were seeing someone. Allie, she purred, eyes flicking between us. And such a distinguished guest. I met her gaze, a spark of boldness igniting. You never asked. Ethan smiled, the perfect picture of composed affection. Alicia and I value our privacy. I felt the shift then, a subtle but seismic change. The same family that had mocked me an hour ago now leaned in, eager for scraps of this new narrative. My mother, eyes shining with approval she had rarely shown, engaged Ethan in eager conversation about his work. My father, normally reserved, asked thoughtful questions, perhaps for the first time in years. Through it all, I marveled at Ethan's ease. He fielded questions with grace, never missing a beat, between bites of seared salmon and sips of wine. He whispered our evolving backstory 3 months, met at a charity gala, mutual love of design and innovation. I played along, each word both thrilling and terrifying. As the night wore on, I found myself lowering defenses I had so carefully built. In the space of whispered exchanges and knowing glances, a strange truth emerged. While our connection had begun as performance, something genuine flickered beneath the surface. Each smile felt less forced. Each brush of his hand sparked an awareness that was unsettling in its intensity. When the DJ announced the next dance, Ethan rose, extending his hand. "Shall we?" I hesitated. Dancing would thrust us further into the spotlight. Yet beneath the uncertainty, a rebellious voice urged, "Why not? They've written your story long enough. Write your own now." I took his hand. The dance floor became our stage. Ethan led with effortless rhythm, guiding me through each step with unspoken assurance. His presence was magnetic. For a moment, I forgot the watching eyes, the web of lies. There was only the music, the feel of his hand at my back, the steadiness in his gaze. As the song ended, applause erupted, not for us, but the timing made it feel as though it was. We returned to our table, hearts racing. Then, amid the hum of renewed conversation, Ethan leaned closer. I hope I didn't overstep. I met his eyes, searching for deception, finding none. Why? I know what it's like to be surrounded by people who diminish you. You didn't deserve that tonight. The honesty in his voice unmoored me. For so long, I had fought this battle alone, convinced no one outside of Olivia could understand. In Ethan's words, there was recognition, not pity. Before I could reply, Cassandra returned, smile brittle. "So, Ethan, how did you two meet again?" The challenge was clear, but Ethan's reply was smooth, unwavering. At the Wilson Gala, Alicia gave a talk that captivated the room. I had to meet her. Cassandra's eyes narrowed, her grip on control slipping. I watched, a strange new confidence blooming. For once, I wasn't the one scrambling to explain, to justify my existence. The night continued, each interaction chipping away at the narrative my family had constructed for me. But beneath the surface, questions swirled. Why had Ethan really chosen to intervene? What did he want from this charade, and why? Against all logic, was I beginning to wish it wasn't a charade at all? As the evening drew toward its close, I sensed the tension rising. Cassandra wasn't done. I saw it in her eyes, the need to reclaim control, to expose whatever she believed I was hiding. The game was not over, but neither was I the same woman who had walked in alone hours before. The moment Ethan placed his hand gently on my lower back as we returned from the dance floor, I sensed the atmosphere around us thicken. The glances had shifted from curious to calculating, and leading the silent interrogation was none other than Cassandra. Her eyes sparkled with the thrill of a new game. I had seen that gleam too many times. It usually meant she was about to peel back layers until she got the reaction she craved. And tonight, I suspected she wanted nothing more than to see me crumble beneath the weight of my family's scrutiny. She approached us with a languid grace, her champagne flute dangling between two perfectly manicured fingers. Ethan and I had just sat down at the table when her voice, smooth and deliberate, cut through the soft murmur of conversations around us. "So, Ethan," she began, her tone dripping with false warmth, "I heard you made quite the effort flying in just for this little family wedding. That must mean things are serious." I felt my breath catch. It was not a question, but a subtle probe. The words were wrapped in polite curiosity, but anyone who knew Cassandra could hear the blade beneath the velvet. Ethan, calm as ever, met her gaze without flinching. "When you care about someone, making the effort is the easy part," he replied, his voice a perfect blend of sincerity and quiet confidence. The answer seemed to catch Cassandra off guard for a fraction of a second. Her smile tightened. How charming. "And when did you two say you first met?" she continued, pressing deeper. Ethan responded smoothly. "The Wilson Charity Gala." Alicia's keynote was unforgettable. I admired her perspective and insight. He gave my hand a subtle squeeze under the table, steadying me. Cassandra tilted her head, her smile growing sharper. "Funny, Alicia never mentioned it. Then again, she keeps so many things to herself these days." My cheeks flamed, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. "I don't share every detail of my life anymore. Cassandra, some of us have learned the value of privacy." For a moment, there was silence. I could feel the attention from nearby tables sharpening, as if they had collectively leaned in. Even my mother, seated a few chairs away, was now watching us intently. Cassandra wasn't finished. She sipped her champagne leisurely before delivering the strike she had prepared all evening. "You know, I overheard the concierge earlier. Apparently, Ethan asked where the Blake wedding was being held when he arrived. Odd. Don't you think if he was expected, surely he'd know exactly where to go?" The implication was clear. The whispers had already begun. I could hear the subtle hiss of doubt weaving its way through the room. My stomach churned. Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. I had just come from a business meeting and wasn't certain which ballroom to head to. "It's a large hotel, after all." His tone remained even, but I could sense the undercurrent of controlled irritation. Cassandra leaned back, her expression satisfied. "Of course, understandable, though it does make one wonder. A sudden arrival, no prior mention of a relationship. It almost seems staged." She left the final word hanging like a guillotine over my head. The tension at our table was palpable. My pulse pounded in my ears. The humiliation I had fought so hard to keep at bay now threatened to engulf me completely. But Ethan leaned forward, his gaze steady, voice low but resonant. "Cassandra, if you have something to say it plainly." His directness seemed to throw her off balance. Her eyes flickered. "I'm simply concerned for my sister. She's been through so much. We wouldn't want her to be misled." There it was, the full blade drawn, painting me as fragile, desperate, incapable of making sound choices, a familiar narrative, one they had written about me for years. But something inside me snapped. The years of swallowing my voice, of letting their judgments define me, boiled over. I turned to her, my voice steady but cold. "I don't need your approval, Cassandra, and I don't need your protection, not anymore." A stunned silence followed. Even my mother blinked, surprised. My father set down his glass, watching intently. Cassandra's mask cracked ever so slightly. For once, she had no ready retort. Ethan's hand squeezed mine again, anchoring me in the storm around us. The wedding continued. The music played. The lights glittered. But something fundamental had shifted. I was no longer the passive recipient of their disdain. Later, after dinner, Ethan led me to the terrace for a breath of air. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass, a sharp contrast to the shadows I felt shedding from within. "I owe you an explanation," he said quietly. "I didn't plan any of this, but when I saw you walk in alone, the way they looked at you, I recognized it. I've been that person." I studied his face, the sincerity in his eyes unsettling. "But why me? You don't even know me." He hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Actually, I do. We met briefly at the Boston Creative Summit last year. Your talk on sustainable design stuck with me. I admired your conviction. When I saw you tonight, I remembered, and the rest, maybe it was impulse, maybe something more." His words unraveled the knot in my chest, replacing it with a dangerous flicker of hope. "I can't afford another mistake," I whispered. Ethan's gaze softened. "Then let's not make one. No lies, no games, just dinner, you and me, no audience." Before I could answer, we heard voices rising from inside. Cassandra was at it again, her voice pitched just enough to draw attention. "She's making a fool of herself. And him. The whole family will be talking." I exhaled slowly. And there it is. Ethan met my gaze. "Only if you let them." His words sparked something deep within me. Maybe it was time to stop letting them define my story. Maybe it was time to write my own. I stood on the terrace for a long moment after Ethan's words, the cool night air pressing against my skin, the weight of years spent dimming my own light beneath my family's judgment suddenly felt unbearable. And yet, a new current stirred beneath the shame, defiance, determination. Perhaps I had let them shape too much of my story already. It was time to change that. I turned to Ethan, my voice steadier than I expected. "Let's go back in. I want them to see that I am not broken." His eyes searched mine. Then he nodded, side by side. We re-entered the ballroom. Conversations faltered as we passed. I could feel their gazes following us, weaving new narratives with every glance. I held my head high, my steps deliberate. At that moment, I was no longer the girl walking alone into the wedding. I was a woman choosing her own ground. We returned to our table just as the speeches began. The best man gave a heartfelt toast, followed by a few light-hearted words from the maid of honor. When the DJ announced that the floor was open for dancing, Ethan stood and extended his hand to me. "Dance with me." I hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then I placed my hand in his and followed him onto the dance floor. The first notes of a slow ballad filled the room. He pulled me gently into his arms, one hand resting at my waist, the other guiding mine. We swayed together, moving in time with the music, yet I felt the tension simmering beneath the surface. I could see Cassandra watching from the sidelines. Her eyes narrowed. I knew she would not let this go. But for now, I allowed myself this moment of quiet rebellion. As the song ended, a sudden voice broke through the hum of conversation. "Well, isn't this a charming performance?" My heart clenched. Cassandra was standing nearby, flanked by a few of my cousins. Her smile was sharp. Ethan's eyes flicked to mine, silently asking if I wanted him to intervene. I shook my head slightly. This was my battle. I faced her, voice calm. "I'm glad you're enjoying yourself." "Cassandra, that's what weddings are for. After all," her eyes gleamed. "Of course. But let's not pretend. Alicia, you always did love a good audience. Tell me, are you planning to keep this charade up all evening?" The implication hung in the air like a noose before I could answer. Ethan spoke. "There is no charade. Cassandra, I care about Alicia. I came here tonight because I wanted to, and frankly, it's disappointing to see how little respect you show your own family." His words hit harder than I expected. For a moment, Cassandra faltered, but then she recovered, her tone turning saccharine. Of course, we all want what's best for her. I just hope she knows what she's doing. With that, she turned and walked away, her entourage trailing behind. I exhaled slowly. "Thank you," I murmured. Ethan looked at me. "You didn't need saving. Alicia, you were handling her just fine." His faith in me, spoken so simply, sent a warmth through my chest that no approval from my family had ever managed. For the next hour, I moved through the reception with renewed resolve. I spoke with relatives, exchanged polite smiles, and when someone brought up the whispers about Ethan and me, I met them with unwavering eyes. Let them talk, I thought. Their words no longer had the power to diminish me. Then, near the dessert table, I overheard a conversation that stopped me cold. Cassandra was speaking with my mother. "I'm just worried about her. Diana, you know how fragile she can be. It would be a shame if this whole night ended in more embarrassment for the family." My mother's voice was low, uncertain. "I don't know what to think anymore. Cass, she's changed so much. She used to be so easy to guide." My stomach twisted. Even now, my own mother doubted me, clung to the narrative Cassandra had woven for years. I stepped forward. "Actually, Mom, I've changed because I finally stopped letting myself be guided by people who don't see my worth." Both women turned. Startled, Cassandra's smile faltered. My mother opened her mouth, but no words came. I continued. "I'm not fragile, and I'm not here to play a part in anyone else's story. If that makes some of you uncomfortable, so be it. I don't need your approval to live my life." The room around us seemed to hush. For the first time, I felt truly heard, whether they liked it or not. I had drawn my line. Ethan appeared at my side, a quiet presence. "Ready to go?" he asked softly. I shook my head. "Not yet. I'm staying until the end. I want them to see that I am not running from this." His lips curved into a small smile. "That's my girl." As the night wore on, the atmosphere shifted. Some relatives approached me with tentative kindness. Others kept their distance, their gazes wary. Cassandra remained seated, her expression tight, her usual air of control noticeably diminished. I could feel the balance of power tilting, ever so slightly, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was reclaiming my place within this family, not as the invisible girl, but as a woman who owned her story. When the evening drew to a close, I stood with Ethan at the edge of the dance floor. The lights dimmed. The final song began to play. He looked at me. "You did this. Alicia, not me, not anyone else. You faced them. You stood tall." His words were a balm to the old wounds I had carried for so long. Maybe the battle wasn't over yet, but tonight, I had won a small victory, and sometimes that was enough to begin a larger war. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the wide windows of my apartment, but it could not wash away the strange mix of triumph and unease that lingered from the wedding. I sat at the kitchen counter with my untouched coffee growing cold beside me. My phone buzzed repeatedly, texts pouring in from various relatives. Some congratulated me for standing up for myself. Others were less generous, thinly veiled judgments disguised as concern. Cassandra, however, remained silent. That silence felt heavier than any of the words. By midday, I decided I needed clarity and closure. I texted Ethan, "Coffee, just us." His reply was immediate. "Name the place and time." We met at a quiet cafe near Central Park, away from familiar eyes. As I approached the table, he rose and smiled. a simple gesture that still sent warmth through me. I slid into the seat across from him, my nerves taut. "I don't want to hide behind last night," I began. "What you did for me. I appreciate it more than I can say. But I need to know why. Why step into my life like that?" Ethan folded his hands on the table, his gaze steady. "Because I've been where you were last night, and no one deserves to stand alone under that kind of judgment. When I saw you walk in alone, and then the way they looked at you, I couldn't ignore it." His honesty cut through my guarded heart. It wasn't pity. Then, it was recognition and something else. Maybe admiration. Maybe more. I nodded slowly. "I'm not used to people seeing me beyond the version my family crafted." "You weren't the only one trapped in a role," Ethan said quietly. "My own family. They used to see me as nothing more than a paycheck. Success in their eyes meant ownership, control. That simple confession opened a window between us. We talked for over an hour, shedding the roles we'd been forced into and sharing the truths beneath them. I walked away from that cafe with something new stirring inside me, a sense that maybe it wasn't too late to reclaim my life, and maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to do it alone. But the universe wasn't about to make it easy. Later that week, during a routine client call, I received a message from an old college friend, Jenna, now a marketing director at a luxury fashion house. "Thought you should know." She wrote, "Your cousin Cassandra has been bad-mouthing you at the industry luncheon, claimed you fabricated your relationship with Ethan to boost your social standing." My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, anger rising. So this was her next move, when public humiliation failed. She was now poisoning my professional circle. I called Jenna immediately. "Thanks for telling me. I'll handle it." My voice was calm, but my mind raced. I couldn't let Cassandra's venom seep into the one area of my life I had built on my own merit. That afternoon, I crafted a carefully worded email to key industry contacts, transparent, direct. I acknowledged the rumors and refuted them without stooping to Cassandra's level. I emphasized the professional achievements I stood on and reiterated my commitment to integrity. The responses trickled in over the next day, supportive, respectful. More than one colleague reached out privately, sharing their own experiences with similar family dynamics. It was a strange kind of solidarity, one I hadn't expected, but deeply valued. Yet Cassandra's campaign didn't end there. Soon after, I heard from Olivia. "Did you see the post?" she asked, her voice tight. My stomach sank. I checked my feed and found it, a vague but pointed post on a popular local gossip account, implying that a certain influencer had staged a fake romance at a high-profile wedding. The comments buzzed with speculation, though no names were mentioned. Anyone familiar with my circle could connect the dots. I felt the familiar pull of humiliation, the urge to hide, to retreat. But then I remembered the woman who had walked back into that ballroom with her head held high. I wasn't her anymore. Not entirely. And I wasn't about to give Cassandra the satisfaction of watching me crumble. I called Ethan. His voice was calm but resolute. "Do you want me to say something publicly?" he asked. "No," I said after a moment's thought. "That would only feed the narrative. I need to handle this my way. But thank you for offering. Always. Alicia. And I mean that." That night, I posted a simple message on my professional profile. I addressed the gossip without defensiveness, reaffirmed my values, and reminded my audience of the importance of not believing every whisper without truth. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Support flooded in from clients, peers, even acquaintances who admired the grace with which I had handled the smear. Yet Cassandra's game had not only exposed her malice, but also begun to fracture the image she had so carefully cultivated. Word spread within the family. A few cousins reached out with quiet apologies. I never realized how much you've had to deal with. One message read, I admire how you're handling it. Even my mother's tone shifted in her next call. Alicia, we may have misjudged a lot. I'm sorry. The battle wasn't won yet, but the tide was turning. Cassandra's carefully polished facade was cracking under the weight of her own bitterness, and for the first time. I saw a path ahead where her shadow no longer defined my steps. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking freedom. And I was learning that sometimes. The best way to defeat a toxic narrative is to rise above it, to live so fully and authentically that no lie can hold. As I closed my laptop that night, I felt a quiet strength settle within me. The fight wasn't over, but I was no longer fighting to prove myself to them. I was fighting for the life I wanted, on my own terms, and that was a battle worth every ounce of effort. The days that followed felt like walking a tightrope, each step measured, each choice deliberate. Cassandra's public smear had stirred sympathy in some circles, but in others, it had seeded doubts. I could sense it in the polite but probing questions during client calls. In the careful way, some acquaintances now spoke to me. The professional world could be ruthless. An image mattered. Deep down, I knew I couldn't let this linger. Then came the invitation that changed everything. A week after the wedding, an email arrived from the organizers of the upcoming Women in Innovation Conference, a prestigious annual event in New York's tech and creative circles. Alicia, we'd love for you to be our keynote speaker this year. Your work in digital storytelling has been game-changing. We believe your story would inspire so many of our attendees. I stared at the screen, heart racing. This was the biggest speaking opportunity of my career. But the timing, the risk, Cassandra would almost certainly try to twist this too. Yet maybe, just maybe, this was the moment to step fully into the light and reclaim my narrative. I took a deep breath and typed my acceptance. Preparation consumed me for the next 2 weeks, crafting the speech, refining the message, rehearsing late into the night. Ethan supported me through it all, offering thoughtful feedback without overshadowing my voice. He never once pushed, never tried to make it about him, just being there, steady and present. A kind of partnership I had rarely known. But beneath the focus, unease simmered. Cassandra's silence had grown louder. I knew her well enough to sense she wasn't done. The question was when and where she would strike next. The answer came the night before the conference. I was reviewing my slides when Olivia called, voice tight. Alicia, check your email now. Dread pooled in my stomach as I opened the forwarded message. It was a blind item in a popular industry gossip newsletter, circulated to thousands of subscribers. A certain keynote speaker slated to inspire young women tomorrow built her career on manufactured drama and family feuds. Beware of those who peddle fiction as empowerment. I felt the blood drain from my face. It didn't name me directly. It didn't have to. The timing was too calculated. The phrasing too familiar. Cassandra's fingerprints were all over it. For a moment, despair threatened to swallow me. Why couldn't she let me have this one thing? Why must every step forward be met with sabotage? I called Ethan, voice shaking. He listened quietly, then said simply, "You already know what you have to do. Show up. Speak. Let them hear your truth, not the noise." His words steadied me. This wasn't about Cassandra anymore. This was about me reclaiming my voice. The morning of the conference dawned clear and crisp. I dressed deliberately, choosing a sleek emerald green dress that spoke of confidence without arrogance. At the venue, the energy buzzed with anticipation. The ballroom was packed with industry leaders, young professionals, and media. As I waited backstage, nerves fluttered, but resolve anchored me. When my name was announced, I walked onto that stage with measured grace, applause washing over me. The lights were bright, but I found Ethan's supportive gaze in the front row. I shared my professional journey honestly, highlighting not just the successes, but the struggles. I spoke of navigating a competitive industry as a woman, of facing personal challenges, of learning to stand tall amidst criticism, without naming names. I addressed the toxic family dynamics that had once defined me, and how I had chosen to rewrite that narrative through my work and integrity. Throughout, I wove in the central theme. True empowerment isn't about perfection or pleasing others. It's about authenticity, resilience, and owning your worth even when others seek to diminish it. As I neared the end, I paused, letting the weight of my words settle. The applause that followed was not polite or perfunctory. It was thunderous, genuine. I felt tears prick my eyes but held them back. I had done it. On my terms. After the talk, a flood of attendees approached me. Many shared their own stories of overcoming family toxicity, of battling doubt. Industry contacts congratulated me, some even hinting at future collaborations. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen for who I truly was, not for the shadows others had tried to cast. Later that evening, at the conference reception, Cassandra's name came up among a group of attendees. Someone mentioned the blind item and the petty attempts to discredit me. To my surprise, the consensus was clear. Anyone who resorts to that level of sabotage only exposes their own insecurity. Your speech today eclipsed all of that. Alicia, the vindication was sweet, but more than that, it was freeing. Cassandra's games were losing power, and I was finally learning that the best revenge wasn't retaliation. It was living fully, visibly, without apology. As the evening wound down, Ethan found me on the terrace. "You were incredible," he said simply. I smiled, a genuine one. "Thank you, and thank you for believing I could be." We stood there for a while, gazing out at the city skyline. The fight wasn't over. Cassandra would likely try again, but something had shifted irrevocably. I was no longer the woman who had walked alone into that wedding, shrinking under judgment. I was standing tall now, voice clear, path forward illuminated. And this was only the beginning. For a brief moment after the conference, I allowed myself to exhale. The standing ovation, the flood of supportive messages, the new doors quietly creaking open in my professional world. All of it felt validating. A part of me dared to hope that perhaps Cassandra would see that her efforts had failed this time, that maybe she would retreat into silence at last. But hope, as I had learned, could be naive. Less than a week later, the blow came. It was early afternoon when my phone buzzed with a notification. My breath caught as I opened it. There, on a prominent industry blog known for its gossipy tone but wide readership, was a new article. Alicia Marie's carefully crafted image hides a fractured family past and a web of deceit. It read, the post dredged up half-truths, twisted details about my parents' divorce, Cassandra's own manipulations presented as my wrongdoings, and vague insinuations about unethical practices in my consulting work. It was clearly orchestrated, written with an insider's venom, and it was spreading fast. I stared at the screen, nausea rising. This wasn't a passing blind item anymore. This was a calculated smear, designed to undermine everything I had just rebuilt. Ethan called within minutes. I saw it. He said, "We'll handle this. You do not have to face this alone." But alone was exactly how I felt as the hours unfolded. Some clients reached out with cautious concern, Others remained silent. The article was vague enough to avoid legal repercussions, but damaging enough to cast shadows. Olivia came over that evening, fierce and protective. "You can't let this stand," she said. "This is malicious defamation. You need to fight back." But how I whispered, "If I respond publicly, I look defensive. If I stay silent." She controls the narrative. "There's another way," Ethan said quietly. "Let's gather the facts, build the truth meticulously, and then tell it on your terms, not in reaction, but with intention." The days that followed were a blur of calls with legal counsel, conversations with PR advisors, and combing through the article line by line. To my relief, several parts were provably false. We began preparing a detailed rebuttal, backed by documents and statements from trusted industry voices. But more than that, Ethan proposed something bold. "You need to reclaim the narrative in a way that makes this look small, not just respond. Transcend it." The idea crystallized into a plan. I would host an open forum panel on ethical leadership in the digital space, inviting respected voices across industries to join me in a conversation about transparency, integrity, and navigating personal attacks. It would be live-streamed, public, impossible to twist. "You're taking this head-on." Olivia grinned. "That's the Alicia I know." As we worked to set it up, the smear campaign took another personal turn. Cassandra sent me a message, bold and brazen. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Walk away from the spotlight, and this all goes away. You don't belong here. Alicia, you never did." My hands shook as I read it, but beneath the fear, anger ignited. No more hiding, no more shrinking. The day of the forum arrived. The room was filled beyond capacity, with thousands tuning in online. The panel included thought leaders I deeply respected, people who had witnessed my work and character firsthand. As I took the stage, I caught Ethan's gaze. "You've got this," he mouthed, and I began. I didn't open with a defense. Instead, I spoke about the broader issue of online defamation, about how personal grudges can become public attacks in the digital age. I shared pieces of my story, enough to provide context without stooping to Cassandra's level. I let the facts speak where needed, calmly, without bitterness. More importantly, I framed it around a universal message. We must not allow those who traffic in toxicity to dictate our paths. We must stand for truth, for resilience, and for lifting each other up rather than tearing each other down. The conversation that followed was powerful, authentic by the end. The narrative had shifted. The article looked petty in contrast to the thoughtful dialogue we had created. As the applause faded and the crowd dispersed, I felt a weight lift. This was bigger than Cassandra now. This was about reclaiming agency, not just for me, but for anyone who had been silenced by similar attacks. Backstage, Ethan wrapped me in an embrace. "You didn't just defend yourself," he said softly. "You changed the game." But even in that moment of triumph, I knew the battle wasn't fully over. Cassandra had played her hand, but something told me she wasn't finished. The difference was, neither was I. Later that night, as I scrolled through messages of support pouring in, one stood out, a simple DM from a young woman I didn't know. "Watching you today gave me the courage to finally confront my own toxic family situation. Thank you for showing us it's possible to rise above." Tears blurred my vision. This was why I had fought, not for reputation, not for ego, but to give voice and strength to those still trapped in shadows. Cassandra's power over me was slipping, and for the first time, I saw clearly that the ultimate revenge wasn't about taking her down. It was about standing taller than she ever imagined I could. And I was just getting started. For a few fleeting days after the panel, the air felt lighter. The messages of support, the positive press coverage, the emails from clients reaffirming their trust in me, all hinted at a tide turning in my favor. I allowed myself a rare moment of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this exhausting chapter was nearing its end. But then reality intruded, sharp and cold. It started subtly. One by one, lucrative consulting offers I had been in final talks for suddenly went quiet. A major contract I had already signed was inexplicably stalled. Whispers began circulating in certain circles. I wasn't trustworthy. Someone suggested I was a liability. The industry, ever driven by reputation, was responding to forces I couldn't quite see. I knew instantly whose fingerprints were on it. Cassandra hadn't retreated. She had merely shifted tactics, no longer attacking me publicly. She was now undermining me behind closed doors where denials couldn't reach. The quiet corridors of influence where deals were made and unmade, where whispered poison spread unchecked. I sat in my office one night, late, staring at a spreadsheet of lost income projections. Anger coursed through me, not just at Cassandra, but at a system that allowed this kind of silent sabotage to thrive. I thought of all the times I had advised clients on managing reputational risk, on resilience in the face of public attacks, and here I was, living it more viscerally than I ever imagined. Ethan found me there hours later. He took one look at my screen, at my face, and said simply, "We fight this. We don't run." How I asked, my voice rough. "She's playing a game I can't win." "The old game," he corrected. "But you already changed the rules once. Do it again." His words planted a seed. I began thinking not just about defense, but about offense, about transforming this latest assault into another opportunity for elevation. But this time, it had to be even bigger, even bolder. Something that would render Cassandra's tactics obsolete. The answer came unexpectedly through an old friend, Julia, a journalist who specialized in investigative pieces on corporate malfeasance. We met for coffee, and as I updated her on the unfolding situation, her eyes sharpened. "You know," she said slowly, "what's happening to you is a textbook case of reputational warfare. It's happening to a lot of women leaders lately. Someone needs to expose it." The idea crystallized almost instantly. What if, instead of continuing to play Cassandra's reactive game, I collaborated on a deep dive feature about reputational attacks on women in business, using my experience as a case study, but broadening it to illuminate the systemic issue. It would reclaim the narrative on a scale Cassandra couldn't match, and it would turn her final weapon against her. Of course, the risk was immense, going public again, this time with such a vulnerable admission, could backfire spectacularly. My legal team was cautious, but in the end, I knew this was the path, not because I sought revenge, but because I was done living in fear. If I had to burn the remnants of my old image to build something truer and stronger, so be it. We spent weeks preparing. Julia conducted interviews with me, with other women who had faced similar campaigns, with industry experts. The fact-checking was painstaking. The narrative had to be airtight. Ethan stood by me every step of the way, his belief in me unwavering, even when my own faltered. The night before publication, I barely slept. Fear twisted in my gut. Once this went live, there was no going back. I would be exposed in ways I had never been before. But beneath the fear, a fierce clarity burned. This was bigger than me now. The article dropped on a crisp Tuesday morning. The headline was "Blunt Reputation as a Weapon Inside the Silent War on Women Leaders." My story was the opening frame, but it expanded into a broader exposé that laid bare the mechanisms of smear campaigns, the complicity of certain PR firms, the psychological toll on targets. The response was immediate and seismic. Messages poured in from women across industries. "Thank you for speaking out. I thought I was alone." Media outlets picked up the story. Panels were organized. Suddenly, the conversation wasn't about Alicia Marie's supposed scandals. It was about the epidemic of reputational warfare and the need for accountability. And Cassandra, for the first time. She stumbled. Her usual sources of influence recoiled under the spotlight. The PR firm she had been using distanced itself, issuing a bland statement about ethics. Several of the clients she had relied on began severing ties quietly. But the most powerful shift was internal. For the first time, I felt truly free, not invulnerable, but free. Free from the need to prove myself on anyone's terms but my own. Free to choose where and how I invested my energy. Free to trust that my voice, flaws and all, had power beyond what Cassandra could ever silence. One evening, standing on the balcony of my apartment, Ethan at my side, I looked out at the city skyline and exhaled deeply. "You did it," he said softly. "No," I corrected. "We're doing it. The fight isn't over, but I'm not afraid anymore." And I meant it. Momentum is a strange thing. Once you reclaim it, even in small ways, it begins to compound after the article's release. My inbox was flooded not just with support, but with new opportunities. Companies who valued transparency reached out. Speaking engagements were offered. Panels requested my voice. I was being seen again, but this time on my own terms. And most telling of all, the silence from Cassandra's side was deafening. Of course, I remained vigilant. This was not a battle that would be won by a single article, but I also knew that the public conversation had shifted so profoundly that any further moves from her risked looking petty or vindictive. The ecosystem that had once quietly enabled her tactics was now wary of the spotlight. In private, however, I prepared for one more strategic move, the ultimate turning of the tables. Among the messages I received was one from an unexpected source, a former senior executive who had once worked closely with Cassandra. Her message was brief but potent. "I have information you may find useful, if you're interested. Let's meet. Discretion is key." Ethan was cautious, but I trusted my gut. We met at a small cafe in Tribeca, both of us choosing seats that afforded privacy. The woman, whom I will call Marianne, was poised and deliberate. I won't pretend I wasn't complicit in some of Cassandra's strategies. She began, but watching how far she was willing to go against you made me sick, and I think it's time someone held her accountable. Over the next hour, Marianne outlined in chilling detail a pattern of behavior that went far beyond what had already come to light. Fabricated stories planted in trade publications, strategic leaks to competitors, even a potential violation of financial disclosure rules related to one of Cassandra's recent consulting contracts. Evidence existed, she said, emails, documents, and she was willing to provide them if I would use them responsibly. I left that meeting shaken but resolute. This was no longer just about clearing my name. It was about exposing a system of manipulation that had harmed many beyond me. After consulting with legal counsel and Julia, we decided to proceed cautiously. A new investigative team was brought in, one with a reputation for rigorous, ethical reporting. My condition was clear. The story had to be fully substantiated. No vendettas, only facts. The next few weeks were a blur of encrypted communications, late-night calls, and tense strategy sessions. The deeper the journalists dug, the more troubling the findings became. Cassandra's empire was built not just on savvy branding, but on intimidation and deceit. Clients who crossed her were discredited. Rivals faced anonymous attacks. Even within her own firm, a culture of fear prevailed. As the investigation progressed, whispers began circulating. Cassandra sensed that something was coming. I received a carefully worded cease and desist letter, more bluff than substance. I ignored it. Then, one evening, a call came from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. Alicia. Came the familiar, icy voice. We don't have to do this. You've made your point. We can both walk away intact. For a moment, I was almost tempted. The exhaustion of the past months weighed heavily, but then I remembered the faces of the women who had written to me, the late nights when I had doubted my own sanity, the quiet dignity I had fought to reclaim. I think it's too late for that, Cassandra, I replied evenly. Actions have consequences. You of all people should know that. The line went dead. The story broke 2 weeks later. A meticulously sourced piece that laid bare Cassandra's methods. The industry reaction was swift and brutal. Contracts were severed. Her board memberships dissolved. Former allies distanced themselves. Investigations were launched, and for the first time in years, she faced real accountability. Yet amid the schadenfreude, I felt a surprising calm. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, about truth reclaiming its place, and about ensuring that others would think twice before employing such destructive tactics. In the days that followed, my own professional path blossomed anew, not because I had destroyed Cassandra, but because I had chosen integrity over expedience. Companies and individuals who valued that came forward, and in that, I found a deeper, more lasting victory than any public takedown could offer. But perhaps the most profound shift was personal. One afternoon, sitting in the sun-drenched corner of a Brooklyn cafe, Ethan reached across the table and took my hand. I'm proud of you, he said simply, not for winning, for the way you won. In that moment, I realized how far I had come, from the girl who had walked into a wedding alone, under the weight of judgment and betrayal, to a woman who had faced one of the most insidious forms of attack and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. The journey was far from over. There would be new challenges, new battles, but now I carried within me a resilience no one could take away, and that I knew was the true victory. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet, not because life had slowed, but because the internal war I had fought for so long was finally settling. The media storm around Cassandra gradually subsided, though her professional demise was undeniable. More importantly, conversations across the industry had shifted. Transparency was no longer a buzzword. It had become a demand, and in this new climate, my voice carried unexpected weight. One crisp October morning, an email arrived that I never anticipated, an invitation to deliver the keynote address at the annual Women in Tech Leadership Conference, the theme building resilience in the face of betrayal. I stared at the screen for several minutes. A year ago, this would have felt unimaginable. Now, it felt earned. Preparation for the talk became a personal reckoning. How do you distill an experience so raw into lessons that empower rather than embitter? I didn't want to perpetuate cynicism. I wanted to offer hope, tempered with realism. The weeks of reflection that followed brought an unexpected clarity. Yes, Cassandra had hurt me. Yes, my own family had failed to support me. But I had also discovered reservoirs of strength I didn't know existed, and I had rebuilt not just my career, but my sense of self. The night of the keynote, the conference ballroom buzzed with anticipation. I stood backstage, calm but alert. Ethan squeezed my hand. Whatever happens out there, remember, you already won. I smiled. I knew he was right. As I stepped into the spotlight, a familiar phrase echoed in my mind. My family laughed when I walked alone into that wedding, the same family who, after seeing the industry's embrace of my story, now reached out with tentative apologies, but the validation I once craved from them no longer held power over me. I had outgrown it. I began my speech with that image. A woman walking alone into a room where she was meant to feel small. And I shared, not the details of Cassandra's fall, but the lessons that rise from betrayal. That when your worth is attacked, the instinct is to shrink, but the real power lies in standing taller, in refusing to let others define you, in remembering that integrity is the one currency no one can counterfeit. The room was silent, then erupting in applause, not because my story was unique, but because it was universal. Everyone in that audience had faced their own version of Cassandra, their own isolation, their own moments of doubt, and now they saw proof that the ending could be rewritten. Afterward, dozens of women approached me, their eyes shining. Some shared their own battles. Others simply said thank you. And for the first time, I understood the full weight of what I had reclaimed. My voice, my agency, my ability to inspire rather than just survive. That evening, over dinner, Ethan asked me the question I hadn't dared voice aloud. So what now? I smiled. Not a comeback. I said, a new chapter, one where I build not in reaction to betrayal, but in alignment with my true values. And build I did, offers poured in, but I chose selectively. I joined the advisory board of 2 startups focused on ethical tech. I mentored young women entering the field, determined to spare them some of the landmines I had navigated. I launched a consulting practice dedicated to helping companies foster cultures where truth and transparency thrived. And my family. They came around slowly. Apologies were offered, not always eloquently, but with sincerity. I accepted them, not because I needed their validation, but because forgiveness freed me more than it absolved them. Even Cassandra, in a rare interview, acknowledged her missteps. I felt no triumph in that, only a quiet closure. One bright November afternoon, as I sipped coffee on the balcony of our new apartment overlooking the city, Ethan turned to me. You know, he said, with that half smile I had come to love. That wedding. It wasn't really the beginning of your downfall. It was the start of your rise. I looked out at the skyline, feeling its endless possibilities. He was right. Sometimes life strips you bare so you can rebuild on a foundation that is truly yours. And so, I leave you with this. Have you ever faced a moment when the world seemed determined to diminish you, when standing alone felt unbearable? If so, know this. That moment is not your end. It may well be your beginning. The path from betrayal to breakthrough is hard, but it is yours to walk. And when you do, you will not only find your voice, you will find yourself,